Do you have a few minutes to listen to this story? Because once I tell you what my husband found when he finally came home, you might need to know how a person gets pushed that far without ever raising her voice. If stories like this are the kind that stay with you long after they end, then stay with me all the way through this one, because what happened to me still doesn't feel like something that should have happened in an ordinary marriage. When my husband unlocked our front door 2 weeks after our son was born, the nursery was empty. Not messy, not half-packed. Empty, the crib was gone. The rocking chair my father built was gone. The tiny blue blankets folded by the window were gone. The drawers had been cleared out so neatly they looked untouched, like no baby had ever been expected there at all. The whole house felt stripped of breath, and on the dining table, under the soft yellow light he never remembered to switch off, there was one photograph, a photo of our son, and a note in my handwriting that said, "What you're looking for is on the back." He turned it over, read one sentence, and called his lawyer before he called me. My name is Nora, and this is the story of how my husband chose his mistress while I was giving birth to our son, then came home expecting forgiveness, and found out I had left him with something much heavier than silence. If you've ever looked at someone you trusted and realised they didn't break your heart in one moment, they prepared the ground for it slowly, carefully, over time, then you'll understand why this story didn't begin in the delivery room. It began with the sort of man people describe as dependable. My husband, Adrian, was not flashy. He wasn't one of those men who announce themselves. He wore expensive watches without pointing them out. He spoke softly in restaurants. He remembered birthdays. He sent thank you messages. He had the kind of face people automatically believed that matters, because betrayal is easier to miss when it arrives in a voice that never sounds urgent. When I met him, I was 28 and tired of men who treated affection like a performance. Adrian felt different, calm, solid, intentional. He listened when I spoke. He knew how I took my coffee by the third date. He ironed his own shirts. He once drove 40 minutes to bring me my laptop charger because I had an early meeting and forgot it at his place. That kind of effort can be very convincing. By the time I got pregnant, we'd been married for 3 years. We'd painted the spare room together. We'd argued over names. We'd spent Sunday mornings walking through baby stores, touching impossibly small socks and pretending we weren't terrified. He kissed my stomach every night before bed. That's why I need you to understand this clearly. I was not in a marriage that looked broken from the outside. I was in a marriage that looked polished. And before I go any further, tell me in the comments where you're listening from and what time it is where you are, because I swear stories like this land differently, depending on whether you're hearing them in daylight or after midnight. I was 37 weeks pregnant when Adrian told me he had to go to the Gold Coast for a client strategy retreat. 3 days, that was all. He said it with that measured voice of his, standing in our kitchen while I was trying to lower myself into a chair without my back giving out. I remember laughing at first because I thought he was joking. I said, "You're not seriously leaving when I could go into labour any day." And he gave me that look people use when they want their selfishness to sound reasonable. He said, "Nora, this matters for my promotion. My phone will be on the whole time. If anything happens, I'll get the first flight back. If anything happens." As if childbirth were weather, as if our son might politely wait for his father to finish wine by the pool and return at a more convenient hour. We argued that night, not loudly, but in that tight, exhausted way couples argue when one person is already halfway out the door and the other is begging not to be left behind. He called me emotional. I told him I was heavily pregnant, which seemed like a fair reason to be emotional. He kissed my forehead before bed and acted like the discussion was settled, simply because he decided it was. He left the next morning in a navy polo shirt and a smell of expensive cologne. He rolled my suitcase-sized hospital bag closer to the door for me before he went, as if that counted for tenderness. I stood in the hallway holding my belly and watched the taillights disappear. Something in me went cold then, though I couldn't have told you why. Maybe women know more than we let ourselves say out loud. Labour started at 2:14 in the morning, not the dramatic movie kind. No screaming, no water breaking all over the floor. Just a pain so deep and exact it seemed to split me right down the centre. I sat up in bed, one hand on my stomach, waiting for it to pass, and when the second one came 8 minutes later, I knew. I called Adrian first, straight to voicemail. I called again, no answer, again nothing. By the time my contractions were 5 minutes apart, I had called him 11 times. I texted, it's happening. Call me now. Then, I'm in labour. Then, Adrian, please. My mother lives an hour away. My closest friend Elise lived 20 minutes from me and answered on the first ring with the kind of panic only good friends bother to feel. She got me to the hospital. She held my bag. She signed the parking stub because my hands were shaking too badly. She rubbed my back while I breathed through contractions and kept glancing at the entrance every time the sliding doors opened, because even then, some humiliating part of me still believed he would come running in at the last possible second with his tie crooked and his face full of apology. Instead, at 5:42 a.m, Elise's phone lit up. She looked at the screen, then at me, and I saw her hesitate. That hesitation was the moment my life changed shape. She said very carefully, "Nora, I need to show you something." It was an Instagram story from a woman named Sienna Blake. I'd heard Adrian mention her before. She worked in marketing for a partner firm. Bright laugh. Stylish. A bit much, he'd said once, which I now understand is the sort of sentence men use when they want to hide interest under mild disapproval. In the video, she was standing barefoot by a resort pool at sunrise, panning slowly across a breakfast table with champagne glasses and fruit, and one man's tanned arm resting beside hers. On his wrist was my husband's watch. The one I bought him for our second anniversary. The caption said, "Couldn't have asked for better company. There are truths your mind rejects before your body does." My whole body understood before my thoughts caught up. I remember my mouth going dry. I remember the metallic taste of fear. I remember another contraction hitting and realising I was about to bring a child into the world while the person who helped make him was drinking sparkling wine with another woman and ignoring my calls on purpose. I didn't cry then. People think heartbreak always arrives as tears. Sometimes it arrives as focus. I borrowed Elise's phone and called him again. This time he answered, not with concern, not with panic. Annoyance first. "Nora, I'm in the middle of something." I said, "I'm in labour." There was a pause. Tiny. Telling then he lowered his voice and said, "I can't get out of here immediately. Just let the doctors do their job. I'll be back as soon as I can." Behind him, I heard a woman laughing, not loudly, just enough. I said, "Are you with her?" Another pause. Then he hung up. I gave birth to my son 12 hours later without my husband in the room. Elise was there. So was a midwife named Janine, who tucked damp hair away from my face with one hand and told me I was doing beautifully with the other. My son arrived red and furious and perfect. When they laid him on my chest, he opened one eye like he already doubted the world he'd entered. I named him Oliver. Adrian didn't meet him until 13 days later. And no, that wasn't because flights were cancelled. It was because men like him only rush home when the consequences become real. The first message came an hour after the birth. "Missed your call. How are you both?" Not, "Are you safe?" Not, "Did I miss it?" Not, "I'm sorry. How are you both?" The kind of sentence you send when you want credit for caring without the inconvenience of actually doing it. Over the next 2 days, he sent flowers to the hospital, then a stuffed elephant with a card signed "Love Dad," as if fatherhood could be couriered in tissue paper. He claimed the retreat became complicated. He said he'd explain in person. He said I shouldn't make assumptions while I was hormonal and exhausted. It's amazing how often women are expected to doubt their own eyes if a man can find the right tone to say it in. I went home with Oliver to a house that suddenly felt staged. Adrian's aftershave still hung in the bathroom. His shoes were lined up by the wall. There was a half-finished list on the fridge titled "Baby Prep" in his handwriting, and something about that nearly broke me more than the affair itself. Not because it was sweet, because it showed me how comfortably a person can rehearse one life while living another. 3 nights later, while Oliver slept in the bassinet beside me, I opened Adrian's iPad. I didn't need to guess the passcode. It was our wedding date. That felt appropriate. Somehow the messages were worse than I expected because they weren't passionate. Passion can at least pretend to be chaos. What I found was management, hotel confirmations, private jokes, photos from weekends he called golf trips. A message from Sienna 3 days before I went into labour that said she'd better not ruin this weekend, and his reply, "Even if she does, I'm not spending another month living like a monk. There are insults that bruise you and insults that rearrange you." That one rearranged me. Then I found the charge statements. The resort had been paid for with our joint account. the same account where we'd been putting money aside for Oliver's first year. Nappies, formula if I needed it, emergency savings, maternity breathing room. Adrian had used that money to take his mistress on a holiday while I waited to give birth to his child. At 10 the next morning, I called my cousin Miriam. She's a family lawyer, efficient in the terrifying way only competent women can be. She came over with takeaway coffee, read everything quietly, then looked at me and said, "Do not confront him before we move." Move! I remember saying the word like it belonged to someone else's life. She nodded. "You have the messages, the call log, the charges and hospital documentation that he knowingly ignored your labour. If the house is in your name, we control timing. Right now your job is not to explode. Your job is to think." That sentence saved me not to explode. To think, so I did. Over the next week, while Adrian kept sending carefully spaced messages about coming home soon and sorting this misunderstanding out, I became very calm. Calm in the dangerous sense. My father and brother came with a van. The house was mine before the marriage, inherited from my grandmother, though Adrian had spent years casually calling it ours as if repetition could rewrite paperwork. Miriam prepared the separation filing, a temporary parenting application, and formal notice ending his occupancy rights. We changed the locks the morning the documents were set to be served. I packed Oliver's clothes first, then the blankets, then the rocking chair. Then every single thing in that nursery I'd chosen with love while Adrian was busy betraying us with deliberate hands. I took my books, my documents, my grandmother's silver, the framed ultrasound from the hallway, the coffee machine my mother gave me, the dining chairs I paid for, the artwork, the crib, the diapers, the wipes, the little stuffed rabbit Oliver slept beside with one fist tucked under his chin. I even took the kettle, not out of spite, out of accuracy. If a man wants to come home to the truth, it should be complete. Adrian texted the night before his return. "Land tomorrow at 3. We need to talk like adults, as if abandoning your wife in labour was childish but forgivable. And leaving a mistress's perfume on your shirt was just one of those complicated grown-up misunderstandings." The next morning, Miriam filed everything. At 2:40 p.m, I buckled Oliver into his car seat in the back of my brother's car. At 2:52, I placed one photograph on the dining table. It was the first picture ever taken of Adrian with Oliver, though Adrian didn't know that. In it, a nurse had positioned the baby in his arms on day 13, when he finally dragged himself to the hospital wearing guilt like a clean shirt. He was smiling for the camera. Oliver was asleep. On the table beside the frame, I left a note. "What you're looking for is on the back." Then I walked out of that house without looking behind me. Adrian entered at 3:18 p.m. I know because my new door camera recorded it. He stepped inside, smiling at first, calling my name. Then the smile dropped. Then came that strange stillness people have when the room stops agreeing with the version of reality they've built in their own head. He walked through the lounge, the kitchen, the hallway, then into the nursery. He stood in the doorway for a long time. I watched later, not because it brought me joy exactly, but because there is something clarifying about seeing shock land on the face of a person who believed only other people had to live with consequences. When he got to the dining table, he picked up the frame. On the back of the photo, I had written 17 missed calls, 1 abandoned birth, joint funds used for your affair. Check your email, my solicitor already has the rest. He read it once, then again. Then he took his phone out and called his lawyer before he called me. That, more than anything, told me he understood, not the pain. Men like Adrian rarely understand pain unless it's happening to them, but he understood exposure, documentation, loss. He understood that the version of me he had counted on, the patient wife, the reasonable woman, the one who could always be persuaded to absorb one more disappointment quietly, was gone. He called me 43 minutes later. I didn't answer. He left a voicemail saying I was overreacting. Another saying Sienna meant nothing. Another saying he panicked and made a mistake. Another saying lawyers would only make this uglier than it needed to be. That's the thing about people who create wreckage. They always talk about ugliness as if they weren't the ones who dragged it into the room. The settlement took months, longer than I wanted, less than he deserved. The evidence mattered. So did the timing. So did the fact that he had knowingly ignored my labour, misused shared money, and lied repeatedly while I was carrying his child. His promotion disappeared. Sienna disappeared faster. Affairs often look romantic right up until paperwork arrives. As for me, I moved into a smaller place near the water with white curtains and too many feeding bottles drying by the sink. Oliver is 8 months old now. He laughs in his sleep. He hates cold wipes. He has Adrian's eyes, which used to upset me more than they do now. I've learned something I wish I had never needed to learn. Abandonment doesn't always begin with someone leaving. Sometimes it begins the first time they decide your pain is inconvenient, the first time they hear your need and rank it below their appetite. The first time they trust your forgiveness more than they respect your presence. I used to think peace would feel dramatic when it arrived, like music swelling in a film. It doesn't. It feels like making tea in a kitchen where nobody is lying to you. It feels like feeding your son at 3 a.m. and knowing the loneliness in the room is honest, not hidden beside you under the blankets. And sometimes, if I'm being truthful, I think the cruelest part wasn't that Adrian loved someone else. It was that on the day our son was born, he knew exactly where he was needed most and still decided he would rather be elsewhere. So let me ask you this. If someone can look at the moment you are bringing their child into the world and still choose comfort, vanity, and another person over you, is that the kind of betrayal you could ever come back from? Or does a choice like that tell you everything you were never supposed to have to learn?